Let me call upon Mr. Oliver Chinganya, who is the manager of the African Development Bank, which, as I said earlier, is a major player in the establishment of the statistical initiatives in the continent in collaboration with ECA and the African Union. Mr. Oliver has worked also for the IMF, and the book makes some serious remarks about the data processes in the World Bank and the IMF as well. So I'm sure he will be answering for both Africa and the IMF. Oliver, over to you.
The opportunity to react to the comments that have been presented by Professor Jevin. But I just want to maybe onset just to remind the audience that mine really is not necessarily to critique the book, but to provide information on what we have done on the continent as a way of reacting to the criticisms that we've had on the credibility of statistics on the continent. I will not say much what has already been said by Professor and others of what has been said in the past about the statistics that have been produced, the concerns that have been raised by the media in the past, and indeed what has brought to us to discuss this issue today. We've heard already how the Ghana situation was actually accredited, that indeed what was produced were actually damn lies. We've heard also what the chief economist of World Bank said about this Africa statistical strategy of what was being produced. And also by one of a very learned person, Michel Ongelo, who was in one of his blogs where he was talking about fixing statistics on the continent. And he likened the statistics that are being produced to an airplane, where a pilot tells and assures the passengers that, look, we are on the plane, and I think the engines are fine. But at the same time, he keeps on saying that I'm not sure whether these engines are actually fixed, meaning that at any time, the plane would crash. That is how he likens our GDP number, just in short. But with all this that has been said, it meant that it left a very, very bad impression on our statistics on the continent, and as being inherited and unreliable. And foreign investors, as a result, they thought their statistics are in danger of being seriously misled about the true size and growth of African economies. Of course, this brought a lot of questions to a number of people, leading to a number of observers within the continent as well as outside to question the reliability of statistics and generally, particularly the GDP numbers themselves. So there was a contradiction. On one side, we are reading articles that are saying Africa is on the rise. Africa is so well. At the same time, we're also hearing at the other side of the coin talking about statistics themselves being very, very bad and also unreliable to be used for investment. And yet, the same people that are telling us Africa has been growing over the last 12 years, around 6% growth rate. The FDI over the years have been increasing from something like $15 billion in 2002 to 46 billion in 2012, based on the same numbers that are being criticized. At the same time, they said Africa is growing. They're also saying that there's the same time that Africa is one of the fastest growing economy, and in fact, 7 countries that are growing fast are actually in Africa. So there's a contradiction. And therefore, that brought a lot of concern to a number of us, to a concern that something needed to be done. That African development is guarding space and foreign investment need reassurance on this reliability of African statistics on the continent. And therefore, we needed to do some fact-finding to actually address these concerns that were being raised. And therefore, the question that we want to raise ourselves, given the two sides of the coin, is, are indeed Africa's statistics as bad as they are being said by the critics? That's a question that we want to address this evening, given also what Professor Jevin has also said. And that's in attempting to do this, as a bank at the African Development Bank, we decided that we were going to launch a survey, basically to concretize what we already know, but sort of quantify it by going back to the countries themselves that supply the information to see if indeed our statistics as unreliable as being said by others. So a survey was conducted in all our countries in Africa. You yourselves, Director of the National Statistical Office, provided this information to us. 6 months later, from March, in October 2013, we did an in-depth assessment to just go back and follow up on the questions, the survey that was undertaken, and see if there is consistency in the information that's provided. And what we found out is the following from the two results. One was that the upward revision that were being said basically was a result of the adoption of the new revision of SNA. We know that our countries, some of them are still operating on SNA in 1968, others on 1993. So because of this adoption of these changes, obviously you could see some changes in the results. There was also an increase or a change or an improved coverage of data in terms of classification, as well as even area in terms of where data was being collected. We also discovered that the rebasing of the data itself was due to revised population figures. A number of countries had actually revised population figures, and also from the data that was collected from industrial surveys and other surveys that was collected. But we also were able to ascertain that most of our countries actually follow SA 1993, although to some extent not that uniform. But that does not mean that you cannot use that information, or rather even doubt what comes out of those results. We were also to establish that all countries actually regularly publish GDP numbers, and they openly publish these to everyone. We also discovered that the better coverage of the informal sector, although not that in-depth, was also contributing to the increase in upward revision of GDP numbers. One of the things we also discovered in the two surveys that we conducted was most countries, and again we are not shy to say this because this is the reality, and some of the things that Professor Morton also found out in his book was some countries publish their GDP numbers with a lag of about 1 to 2 years in terms of publicizing the numbers. This certainly was an improvement when you compare some in the 1980s, in which some of the years Professor is also referring to. Also, something a little bit gloomy was that richer countries did not necessarily guarantee better statistics. In other words, that even if a country is rich, did not necessarily mean that they would have actually good statistics. Again, we're not shy to talk about these things. We also discovered that, there were actually smaller countries that put a lot of investment or invested a lot more in statistics to have better statistics. But, as I said, there are certain things that also were quite negative in the survey, that there was still need for us to adhere to certain guidelines within the National Statistical Office and within the SNA system itself, and also that we know that a lot of our countries are data poor in the sense that they don't have survey data that is required. And therefore, to do that, we have to adopt new survey programs to be able to respond to some of these activities. One of the key findings also was that the sources and methods used by African countries are actually as good as those that are used by other regions, including Europe, including the US. There was no difference that the methods that were used were any different from those that are used by others. If there's any difference, is that they had more access to administrative data than we did for various reasons, financial and other constraints. But in doing this, one of the things that we have done on the continent to address some of the issues is we have come up, or we have developed what we call a guideline on statistical business register to be able to provide information that would be used to come up with survey frames to conduct survey on economic statistics and so forth. But just to show you that there is actually no difference in the way we do the revision with the other regions, I would show you that when you look at Asia, what we did was we picked 2005 as the baseline. The reason we picked 2005 was that in 2005, it's the year when all countries on the continent, most of the countries on the continent had supplied data to what we call the International Comparison Program. And that data that was provided was so detailed, the GDP breakdown was so detailed. And therefore, when we make a reference 7 years later in 2013 to see how many of those have actually changed or revised their GDP, this is what we find. That we have countries in Asia that revise the data at almost 100% time. We have countries that revise even in the negative 80% downwards of what they had provided. And if you go to Europe, in Asia, you see a similar situation where you have Turkey revising their GDP by 35%. And if you go to Africa, you see a similar situation. So what is the cause for worry to say that Africa does it different from others? And yet, in the way we revise and the direction of revision are exactly the same as other countries or other regions. However, when we look at the base years, in other words, how outdated our base is, indeed, again, I would agree with the Professor that we do have countries, some of them whose base years are as old as 20 years. But we have very few of them, about 8 of them. But most of them are within 10 to 15 years. But of course, we need to improve that because only a few of them are within the requirement of 5 years before. However, this picture, really what it does, it gives us some kind of assurance on the quality of African national accounts, and that these estimates, they're actually as good as expected, and therefore there's no reason to think that the levels and growth of are deliberately falsified by anyone or manipulated or indeed negotiated. One of the things that I would like also to state is that Africa participates in one of the largest statistical programs, the international program of international comparison program, where 195 countries are participating, using international methods coordinated by an international organization, the World Bank and the UN. And what you see from there is that Professor Ben has already mentioned that in 1970, only one country participated. But over the years up to 2011, we have all the countries participating, apart from 3 in 2011. And I want to show you the kind of situation when you compare across the continent, across the region, that you see that Africa's share in that participation, when you look at the population, about 13% of the population was covered in 2005. In 2011, you see an increase to about 14% of the African population. So we can see how significant that it is overall. But when we come back to the continent itself, I want to mention that there are only 3 countries that did not participate. But overall, you have to discover that 26% of the countries that are part of the UN system are actually Africans participating in that program. That's how large it is, meaning almost 30% of the countries of the UN members are actually belong to African countries. Now, looking at the data that was provided to this global statistical structure that I was talking about, you can see that all countries were able to provide the data in 2011 on national accounts, on prices, and the quality was also investigated. And you yourselves, the directors, were the ones that were able to verify this data and provide them to us. And you can see that it's only in a few cases where we have probably about 47, but the rest of the countries were about 50 or so that provided information. So in conclusion, basically what we are saying here is that African national accounts estimates are as reliable just as those from other regions. And therefore, for us, what we are doing to enhance these findings, one is that we would like to promote, or we are already promoting what we call the economic census, so that countries are able to rebase economic indicators around the same time of the period, just like we do for the census. The census is conducted every 10 years. And ours, we've started already working towards having to conduct economic censuses at least within that period. Also to ensure that we have a robust household and establishment survey program that will feed into economic statistics and avoid these unnecessary criticism that we may have if indeed they come. And also that we would like to encourage countries to establish statistical business registers, as I've already mentioned, as a basis of improving economic statistics. One of the things also that we have is that we want to build a system where we are able to assess progress as often as possible. And that's why last year we were able to conduct a survey. And this time around also, we have also instituted what we call peer reviews, where national accounts experts from different countries go to another country to discuss a system, the methodology, their compilation forms, so that they're able to share the best practice and be able to build on that to go and improve their own systems when they go back in their country. And therefore, really what I'm saying is that let us tell our own story, because we know what we do. Thank you.